Galaxy 666 by Pel Toro. Session 26.
Chapter 8. That strange purple twilight which they had seen from above was apparently another of the strange tricks of the atmosphere which this incredible planet was capable of planning. Now there was no sign of the purple light anywhere at all. Now the planet was illuminated by a soft rose-pink luminescence that might have come from the weird star around which it revolved, and into which they had almost been sucked by some strange kangaroo-like leaps, or alternatively, it might have risen up from the surface of the planet itself. Having become acclimatized to the pink-tinged light, which gave everywhere a strangely roseate appearance, and which had the effect of lulling their senses into a rather dreamy false security, the four explorers looked down at the ground beneath their feet. The ground beneath their feet was a very odd sort of terrain, though terrain is not, strictly speaking, the kind of word that ought to be used to describe the ground of a planet which is not Earth. Like so many of the old Earth words, it has crept into the vocabulary of the Empire. So they examined the terrain. It was patchy, and there was no kind of order in the patches. Here and there were more drastic changes. In other places, changes were slow and gradual. Across to their right they could see two round hillocks coming out of the ground itself. Between their position and those two hillocks there was an expanse of flat, smooth rock, so flat and smooth that it was slippery and difficult to walk on. There were pinkish streaks among the rock, and it seemed that some of the chromatic tint from the atmosphere owed its origin to these. There were a number of white veins in the rock, which bore some kind of resemblance to marble, but the majority of it was gray. It gave an overall impression of grayness, streaked with pink and white, rather than an overall impression of whiteness, tinged with gray and pink, or an overall impression of pink, streaked with gray and white. Grayness was the dominant background shade. Neither black nor white, but something midway between the two. It was a light, rather than a dark gray. Yet it could never have been so light that it might have been mistaken for an off-white. The four explorers carried on across this flat terrain. Ishkloss suddenly tripped and sprawled full length. The substance on which they walked was hard, and yet did not have the same unyielding hardness as granite or flint. It was more like the hardness of tough and highly polished wood. Ishkloss picked himself up, and rubbed ruefully at the bruise on his shin. "Darn stuff is hard," he said. They continued a little more cautiously. Korzak went down, then Bronit, finally Oski. After that they linked arms, and continued on their way. They reached the first of the round mounds that they had seen. They looked for all the world as though some giant with an odd sense of humor had taken a mammoth ball and squashed it at top and bottom, then laid it on the ground to add just one more enigma to this enigmatical planet. Geographically speaking, it might have represented a little world which had given up the struggle for independence and had come and settled there. Geographically speaking, it was expanded at the equator and flattened at the poles. If two brass rings are fastened to an apparatus in a laboratory, and the apparatus is made to revolve at a rather frightening speed, the effect of centrifugal force will be to flatten the brass rings. These two mounds looked like soft constructions that had been spun on a potter's wheel for a few moments till the centrifugal force had begun to do its work. They were odd mounds, surprising mounds. There was something unnatural about them, yet exactly what it was the four explorers had no way of knowing. They passed on, all around the edge. The mound was about 100 yards in diameter, 3 times that distance in circumference. It bulged above them, dark, brown, and rather sinister. It contrasted strangely with the gray, white, and pink rock from which it had sprung. Apart from the unusual shape, there were no other signs that it was an artifact rather than a natural phenomenon. And with the mound as yet another unexplained mystery, they struck out toward the next mound. This was so closely identical to the twin which they had just left that they paused only long enough to circumnavigate it before proceeding to something that caught their eyes a little to their left at about 500 or 600 yards ahead. The atmosphere here had changed from pink-white to a warm golden yellow. It was not exactly misty, but at the same time it was not possible to see clearly for any great distance. They were within 300 or 400 yards of the object before they could see it with any great degree of clarity. It was about the same diameter as the mounds which they had passed. It was circular as they had been, but it reared up to a pinnacle above their heads, till it must have been 1,000 feet above them. It was a rather breathtaking construction. The golden glow seemed to be emanating particularly from a rectangular area on the surface that now faced them. In the center of this rectangular area, rather more toward the top than in the geometric center, there was a red band extending almost the full distance across, and occupying something like 1/6 of the jaundiced rectangle. There were strange yellow marks carved, so it seemed, into this red band, and if there had been any doubt about whether the round mounds were artifacts, there seemed no doubt at all about this.
Here ends session 26.